So from that point on, if you listen to a lot of the score, it's like really the rhythms and the way the syncopation and all that stuff is actually more inspired by pop music than it is classical music.
The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
You composed the music for Bridgerton,
Yes.
and it's known for their Vitamin String Quartet covers of
Yes.
famous songs. But did that change how you approached the score? Like, when did you know that they were going to use that when you started scoring, and how did that,
Yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't know until my first spotting session of the first episode, but I had already started writing music before that point. And so we were in this trial and error period where they told me they wanted it to be this fresh take on the Regency era. And my first instinct was to write a bunch of classical style music and then chop it up into samples and make like pop music out of it. And that didn't work. And they're like, that's not what we want. And so then I was like, okay, maybe I'll write music of the period, but record it really in a modern way and make it sound alive in that way. But it just fell flat and sounded like it was period specific. And at some point I had to write a theme for the main couple in the first season on the piano because they were using it in the scene. And the director gave me some Ravel piano pieces, and like that opened up my mind for beautiful, and it made me think about the era completely differently. So then that was the first window. But then we had that spotting session, and I remember hearing "Thank You Next" in that first episode, and realizing that it was so smart that it put us as an audience immediately into the headspace of these characters, because we all would, if you know that song, have a relationship with what that song is about. So now you know what these characters are thinking as they go into this hall. And so what changed for me at that point was realizing that if I look more to pop music for melody inspiration, for like rhythmic inspiration, for tempo inspiration, then the music that I write, even if it has a classical instrumentation, is going to feel more pop and modern. So from that point on, if you listen to a lot of the score, it's like really the rhythms and the way the syncopation and all that stuff is actually more inspired by pop music than it is classical music.
Does your creative process change in that way? Like doing Spider versus Bridgerton, which is, more classical versus something more upbeat or,
Yeah, it does. At the beginning of the process is the same, where I'm looking at the emotion of each character and trying to find a way to represent that with a melody and all of that. But then the next step is where it starts to split, where for Bridgerton, I might look at, classical pieces or pop pieces that maybe also speak to that feeling and try to see if there's something about the instrumentation or the pace or anything that makes me feel that way, and start to try to incorporate some of those choices into this theme that I've written. And then with Spider-Noir, it's kind of the same thing, where the theme for Ben is based on who he is as a person and his humanity and that emotion. But then immediately, as we start to write it to the episode, it needs a certain instrumentation, a certain sound. And so then it's looking at noir scores or, superhero scores or modern random references, where a lot of our references started getting, I remember talking to Michael about like Nine Inch Nails references or a reference.
I was going to ask you about Atticus and Trent.
Oh yeah, I'm huge. Yeah, I feel like their texture and sound design is always so great. So yeah, like we'll talk about that. Or I saw a documentary once I was watching for fun, and I was like, there's something about this percussion sound that's really interesting. We should look at that for Spider-Noir. And so looking for inspiration anywhere, it's almost like when you work on a project, it creates this filter that then you see the whole world through that filter, where like if you see something, it's like, oh, that'll be perfect for this thing I'm working on. And each project has a different filter.
With the Spider-Noir, balancing noir and kind of a modern superhero, what did you use or what instruments did you use to try to balance that out?
Yeah, I think for the noir aspect, it was definitely just leaning into the orchestra and having these swelling orchestral moments. And even some of the prepared piano, like Michael said, on the panels, inspired by Jerry Goldsmith and Chinatown. So like certain elements were also inspired by the way that those composers approached action music. And I was thinking about the King Kong score is another one, or Double Indemnity is another score we looked at a lot. And then on the modern side, and actually before I leave the noir stuff, using the theremin I think was another big thing, because it's such an old synth, and it became the way to represent both sci-fi and also like psychological disturbances in that period. And so using that sound was a way to kind of nod both to noir, but also create this bridge into the modern. And then for the modern stuff, it was really just kind of anything that would come up. I think the guitar stuff was definitely driven by Oren, our filmmaker, who loved the sound of guitar and wanted some of that. We did talk about not having much in the way of, or not leaning on drum production. Because what was interesting, we talked about being modern, and one of the first instincts is maybe to add some like drum production stuff. But what we found is that it actually starts to make it hard to not make it feel like a loop at some point. And also, the great thing about some of those noir scores is that they didn't really lean on the percussion that much. The percussion is actually more of the color that accents things, as opposed to like this percussion track that's just going and going across everything. And so that really taught us to lean more on all these other instrumentations, and then add any drum production like after the fact to like emphasize things, as opposed to starting with the drums as like a beat that creates a loop, and then suddenly it starts to actually drag the scenes down.
The theremin is one of the most greatest instruments of all time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
When did you first hear it to know that I'm going to use that one day? Was it in Plan 9 from Outer Space? Was it the Beach Boys? When did you first hear that?
You know, it's funny. I first heard it when I was in high school. I went to an arts high school here in LA, and for one of my friends, who's actually one of my team members now, his family would have these concerts in their house. And I remember going to a concert and somebody played a bowed saw. And I was like, that's like such a random thing. But he played this like classical piece on bowed saw, and it was beautiful. And somebody said, that sounds like the theremin. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And so I went home and looked it up, and then found some recordings of a theremin, or like went to the library and got a CD. So I can't even remember what that recording was, but I remember it being inspired by this bowed saw and wanting to find a sound that was similar to that.
Well, I absolutely love the score for The Wild Robot.
Thank you.
And I love how it opens for the I could use a boo sequence and just lets the score really tell a lot of the emotion. That was your first animated film.
Yeah.
What was the process like working through animation against live action?
Yeah, it was incredible, because one of the biggest differences is that you usually start much earlier, because they are oftentimes working on the film years in advance. And like, you know, for live action, a lot of the years that people work on a film is in the script phase, but then once they start shooting, it's a pretty fast process from there to the end. Whereas for animation, they're working on the imagery at the same time as they're working on the story. And so they kind of need the composer in early, because they're already starting to figure out what it looks like and what the pace is going to be. And so I Could Use a Boost, the first time I wrote music to that was to black and white pencil sketches. And so the process of watching something that carries all the emotion in the story and all the emotion in these black and white, simple, minimal sketches was really fascinating, because then you have to rely both on your filmmaker's ability to tell you what this is going to look like eventually, and reminding me that in that scene it was like, okay, right here you're actually going to see like thousands of geese. And so I have to imagine what that's going to look like and write music that feels like thousands of geese instead of music that sounds like just like Roz and Brightbill together, essentially. And using concept art, where like, even though you have these black and white pencil sketches version of the movie, they have all of this concept art where you walk into their space and the whole walls are filled with single images that look like paintings of what this film will eventually look like. And so really leaning on these references and using your imagination actually was like this more freeing experience for me, because then they're going to react sometimes to what the music's going to be, or I also don't have to worry about if I'm hitting everything, because I can trust that they're going to tell me, you know, this actually needs to be bigger because it's going to be a much bigger moment, or this is going to be really dark actually. It doesn't look dark right now, but that's going to be darker, so make it dark, like make it a little bit grittier. And so that collaborative process, I think, becomes a bit more of a less siloed and less alone.
I love The Last Repair Shop.
Thank you.
And are you going to direct again? And
Yes,
what
yeah.
are you going to work on?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a documentary right now about a school here called Colburn that I went to school. Oh, you know Colburn? Oh, amazing. Yeah.
My cousin is a professor there.
Really? What do they teach?
Violin.
Wow.
Yeah, Sam Fisher. I don't know.
Sam Fisher. Okay, I'll have to ask. Yeah, we're making a series about basically different profiles from students to faculty members to staff members, just looking at this community from different vantage points. So I'm directing that my friend Ben is producing for me, and then I'm writing a project about this vocalist named Roland Hayes, who's this amazing black vocalist in the early 20th century that I feel like people should know about. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, look at those names to the left. They are part of the Skywalking Force, our Patreon.
Become a producer yourself and check out all the Disney Plus themed bonus content available depending on the level you subscribe.
Become a member of the elite Skywalking Force at skywalkingforce.com.